we started to do that. But to get the reef in is very difficult under those conditions because you have to get the sail away from the spreaders. And we did that by taking in the leech on the coffee grinder. By doing that, the boom broke. And then you're really in a terrible hassle. So we had to take down the spinnaker first underneath the broken boom, but we managed. And we also managed to keep the boat out of the gyre, which was very difficult because the waves were very high indeed. And then we got the mainsail down. And at that moment, we had no sail up at all. And we were still doing 10 knots, so you can imagine how hard it blew. We then got 2 blast reachers pulled out in spinnaker poles, and we still covered that day's 281 miles. So we didn't do too badly. But it was a frightening experience. Luckily, we had with us outer sleeves to repair the boom, which we did on deck. And the whole operation took about 12 hours, and we had the mainsail back up again. But it was blowing so hard that I don't think we lost any mileage because of the breaking of the boom. In the evening of that same day, still running under those blast reaches, we were pooped by a wave, very high wave, and we were thrown on our side. The port pole, of course, went into the water and sheared loose from its bracket on the mast and dented the mast very badly. We only found out the next day how bad the dent was in the mast, and that really worried us very much for the rest of the leg.
Flyer was not the only yacht to be breaking spars in these conditions, for 5 other crews suffered broken booms, including FCF Challenger, whose crew did not carry spare sleeves and had problems with their repairs for the rest of the voyage. Charles Heitzig's crew lost more than 600 miles on Flyer after sailing further south and meeting headwinds from the wrong side of a low-pressure system 2 weeks out of Cape Town. And skipper Alain Gabet was now having to push his yacht to the limit to try and catch up lost time. Both Ceramco and Flyer's Navigatoriums were equipped with the very latest computerized instrumentation and satellite navigation sets. So the battle that developed between them for line honors became more a war of nerve and skill than deep pockets. After racing neck and neck across the Indian Ocean, 30 miles was all that divided Flyer from her rival as she turned up into the head seas, met in the Tasman. His harsh, uncomfortable sailing heeled at 30 degrees, and Flyer slammed incessantly into these unrelenting seas for more than a week, severely testing crew morale. But the Royal New Zealand Orion, sent up to spot the leaders, brought some light relief on this 1,000-mile beat to New Zealand's northern cape. But Ceramco's crew were enjoying these conditions even less, and Flyer increased her lead to more than 100 miles by Cape Reinga. And the 200-mile run down the east coast to the Auckland finish line was bliss by comparison. As dawn broke the following morning, it appears all New Zealand was tuned to the finish.
What a spectacular sight. Flyer's huge red, white and blue spinnaker, big enough to cover a house, is harnessing the northerly of 15 knots, and the big Dutch Maxie's doing 15 knots as they power to the finish out off Iraqi Wharf, crammed with people who are giving the Dutch boat a great reception as they break Condor's record from Cape Town set 4 years ago. At last, the moment Auckland has waited for. The Whitbread Round the World race comes to town.
Flyer broke the record for the 7,100-mile voyage from Cape Town by a 4-hour margin, and the crowds waiting on Marsden Wharf gave them a magnificent welcome. It had been such a close-fought duel, and shouting their congratulations, no one suspected this skipper had suffered a heart attack in mid-ocean, a fact he and his crew were to keep secret for the rest of the race.
If Flyer's welcome was enthusiastic, Saramco New Zealand is sailing to an emotional spectacular. What a sight! Auckland has never seen anything like this. There must be a record number of dental appointments or grandmother's funerals this afternoon. Saramco New Zealand fizzes down some big seas as they close to the finish, spearing through the water like a destroyer pushing up a big bow wave.
Flyer may have snatched line honours for the second time, but Saramco headed the handicap listings for this leg ahead of Charles Heidsieck, who reduced Creta's overall lead to a 7.5-hour margin. During Flyer's stay, the spars damaged on the previous leg had to be replaced, which meant having a 50-foot-long lower mast section stored in Holland for such emergencies, air freighted halfway around the world in time to have the yacht re-rigged before the next start on Boxing Day. It was to be a fantastic send-off, with thousands lining every vantage point, and many more taking to the water themselves. On the overall standings, Flyer now had to give Heidsieck 74 hours and 95 to Creta 9 to capture the handicap lead. But the real race, yet again, was to be with her old adversary, Saramco New Zealand.
The 22 boats are sending their spinnakers now in answer to the southwesterly breeze of 10 knots, and the boats like Saramco New Zealand are doing about 10 knots. What a spectacular sight, as there are boats of all shapes and sizes, and now they're starting to weave and plate their wakes behind them. So the third Whitbread Round the World Yacht Race, and the third leg is underway, and the lead boat for the pride of New Zealand is Saramco New Zealand, and that's what Peter Blake wanted to do. He wouldn't share with us the secret that he wanted to try and barrel away from the start. Further though and more cautious is Flyer, further down to windward, and so the fleet are underway. They're going to a mark out off Castor Bay around the sail training ship Spirit Adventure, then off Cape Colville, next stop Cape Horn.
A start in the Whitbread Round the World race is of course different than a start in the Maxi series in Cowes. In Auckland, the spectator boats were even worse than in Portsmouth, and one had to be really careful not to hit them. Here, it's much more important to find some free air, and what I always tried to do was to get a little bit away from the big crowd, get over the starting line, perhaps 10 seconds too late or 5 seconds too late, but that doesn't matter at all if you have 7,000 miles to go, and get away in clear air and be safe. It's understandable that Saramco wanted to make a very good start there. It was their home waters, that they had a lot of supporters around them, but to us that was not important at all.
Well, action it certainly is, I can tell you. It's dangerous down here at the moment. If you can see all the white water, it's just like being in the rapids on the West Coast rivers. We've had a lot of fools and idiots on enthusiastic fizz boats getting very close to the race boats, and the Saramco New Zealand crew have been waving a lot of the boats away as they have gone to the mark out off Castor Bay. But unfortunately, enthusiasm and eagerness is the name of the game here, rather than good sense. But it all adds to the fantastic Mardi Gras mayhem that we're witnessing at the moment. Saramco New Zealand is the leading yacht from 4 French boats, Charles Heidsieck, Creta, Euromarseille and Gauloise. And moving into second position now is the big giant from Holland, Flyer, the line honours machine that holds the record halfway around the world. It has really been an emotional spectacular out on the harbour today. White water in all directions, a huge crowd, over 3,000 craft with an estimated 50,000 people on the water, and the conservative estimate of 100,000 around the shores have given the third Whitbread Round the World race fleet a great farewell. Well, right now, the leading boat, Saramco New Zealand, is around 4 miles out from the mark that was off Castor Bay, marked by the sail training ship spirit of adventure. It really is one of the great occasions. Certainly I have never seen anything quite to match the spectacle that we've got at the moment. Having seen about 8 Sydney Hobarts and several Fastnet and Whitbread starts, the spectacle here has to be seen to be believed. There is white water everywhere, being churned up by literally thousands of boats, well-wishers and launches, old-fashioned, new, fizz boats, windsurfers, and there are yachts of all shapes and sizes out here. This bright, brilliant, sunny day has really been set off by the spectacular occasion where a New Zealand boat led the 22 boats from 15 nations out through the Rangitoto Channel and onto the Hauraki Gulf.
Flyer now had Saramco clearly in her sights as the two yachts headed out to sea. Battle was joined once more. One of Flyer's crew is hoisted aloft to change over spinnaker halyards, a task that has to be done after every jibe to limit chafe, which would otherwise cut through the wire within a matter of hours. Flyer finally caught up with her rival 2 hours after the start, just as the wind headed, making it a race to pull down spinnakers first and replace them with light genoas. And after tacking towards Cape Colville and resisting a pair of worthy attempts to distract his attention, Connie van Rietschoten took Flyer into the lead. But Flyer's crew didn't reckon on Peter Blake's local knowledge, or the wily tactics of that canny Frenchman Eric Tabarly on Uromachi. By steering a southerly course close to New Zealand, both stole a 40-mile lead on Flyer. And for the first time in this race, Connie and his crew found themselves at a disadvantage. Alain Gabet's crew on Charles Heidsieck, now so close behind Krita's time in the overall standings, were determined to take over the handicap lead on this 6,000-mile leg round Cape Horn. But the sole thought on Saramco is to keep Flyer astern. With the helmsman and his backup stationed at her two wheels and the log continually flickering off the clock, the Kiwis had their nose in front and would now be all the harder to beat. For Eric Louzot and his crew on Gauloise, this leg was to be the end of their race. First, a spinnaker pole buckled, forcing them to take down their chute before clearing away the damage. And later, they were dismasted. It was a bitter disappointment for Loiseau, who'd skippered the handicap winner on this leg 4 years before and had high hopes of winning this time too. On Flyer, the race was on to catch up lost time. And that day she covered 164 miles in 12 hours, an exhilarating burst that reduced the Kiwis' lead to 17 miles. The next day was even better. 327 miles from noon to noon. A new Whitbread world record that brought the Dutch yacht to within 12 miles of Soramco. Three days later, exactly halfway to the Horn, Flyer broke into the lead, her speedometer rarely registering less than 15 knots. This was the race of the century. Each crew pushing their yacht to the limit, holding spinnakers up in force 10 winds and surfing at more than 30 knots, just miles apart from each other on the final run towards the Horn.